The road of no one. The beginning of the nightmare. Carlos was exhausted. After hours of driving down a deserted road, he began to wonder why he hadn't yet reached his destination. The landscape around him was strange. Distorted trees, a thick fog that covered the ground and made the road seem endless ahead of him. The car's headlights illuminated the path, but they couldn't dispel the oppressive feeling that something was wrong. The road seemed alive. He gripped the steering wheel, trying to push away the unsettling thoughts that began to creep into his mind. Something was wrong, and Carlos knew it. There were no signs of movement, just an empty, dark road. And yet he felt a presence. Something was watching him. When he looked into the rearview mirror, a wave of terror swept through him. He saw something reflected in the glass, a shadow moving quickly, almost imperceptible. Carlos's heart raced. He looked forward, trying to stay calm, but fear had already settled in. Minutes passed like hours. The road seemed endless. Then he saw something that made him freeze, a figure at the side of the road. A woman with long black hair, wearing a dirty white dress, stood there, staring at him. Not knowing what to do, Carlos decided to keep driving, speeding up to escape the strange sight. But when he looked in the rearview mirror again, he saw that she was still there, watching, as if she had moved into the middle of the road. With his heart racing, Carlos made a desperate decision. He was leaving. He pressed the accelerator, and when he looked back again, she had vanished. But what he didn't know was that something much worse was about to happen. The endless road, the fear intensifies. Carlos could no longer control his fear. The road seemed to transform around him. The traffic signs disappeared, and the dense fog took over the environment. He was lost, not knowing which direction he was going. The headlights only illuminated a small part of the road, and everything around him seemed to distort, as if he were entering another dimension. The woman's figure appeared again, now closer, clearer. Her eyes were completely black, and her skin seemed pale, almost translucent. She was no longer just at the side of the road. Now she was in the middle of the path, standing still, as if waiting for something. Carlos didn't know what to do, but he knew he couldn't stop. He tried to accelerate, but the engine seemed to falter, as if something were draining the car's power. And then she spoke. Her voice, low and hissing, made Carlos's blood freeze. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice echoing in his head. "The road is mine. Everyone who passes through here never leaves." Carlos tried to accelerate once more, but his eyes strayed to the rearview mirror. And then he saw the road had completely changed. The trees were moving, stretching in impossible directions, and the shadows around him began to form indistinct figures, something indescribable, like a threat approaching. Carlos tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness, and the sound of the car's engine was muffled by an invisible pressure, as if the car were being consumed by the road itself. The weight of reality. The cycle begins. Carlos slammed on the brakes. He could go no further. The fear had become unbearable. He looked to the side and, for the first time, saw the road in its entirety. It had no end. The earth, the vegetation, everything seemed to be a distorted copy of reality. Time had stopped. What was happening? He got out of the car, trying to understand what was happening, but every step he took felt heavier than the last. Something was wrong, very wrong. Every time he looked at the road, it seemed darker, more suffocating, and the shadows around him seemed to come alive. He was no longer alone. Whatever had been watching him was now drawing closer. Carlos felt a pressure in his chest, as if an invisible force was squeezing his soul. He tried to run, but he didn't know where to go. The road was closing in, as if it were being sucked into a vortex. and he felt there was no way out. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. "I told you, you wouldn't leave," the woman's voice echoed again, louder, closer. Carlos looked back, and she was there once more, standing in the middle of the road, her black eyes fixed on him. It was as if she were the road itself. She slowly approached, and he felt an immense dread, as if his life were being drained with each passing second. The shocking truth. The forgotten past. Carlos was trapped. He felt an invisible force pulling him toward the depths of the road. What he didn't know was that he had already become a part of it, that the road had chosen him. He was being consumed by the same force that had taken the woman before him, and everyone who ventured onto that path was destined to meet the same fate. But the woman spoke again. This time, her words were clearer. She revealed the truth about the road. "You think you can escape, but everyone who passes here gets trapped, just like me. The road takes anyone who dares to challenge it. And you're just another victim. The road has no end, and it will never let you go." Carlos tried to understand, but there was no time. He felt the road swallowing him whole. What he was seeing, what he was feeling, it was all an invisible prison. He was already lost. The final journey. The mystery of the endless road. Carlos was in a situation he could no longer comprehend. The road ahead seemed to stretch into infinity, as if it never ended. The sky above was heavy, a dark, sinister color, as if the very atmosphere was being consumed by something invisible yet palpable. The sound of the wind was his only companion, and he felt that something or someone was there, watching, waiting for the right moment. Every step he took seemed like another plea for the road to swallow him. The fear was no longer just a feeling. It was a constant presence, as if it were inside him, pulsing through his veins. He heard strange noises, muffled voices, whispers that seemed to call his name, but when he turned, no one was there. He felt a presence beside him, something getting closer, and yet he couldn't see it. Then he heard it, a distant melody, sweet yet disturbing, like a song that called to him, seduced him. He wanted to ignore it, but something inside his mind, something deeper, urged him to follow it. With each step he took, the melody grew stronger, clearer, until he had no choice but to walk, as if guided by forces beyond his control. As he moved forward, the shadows around the road began to stir, to twist. Distorted faces appeared on the edge of his vision, always out of focus, but always present. A chill ran down his spine when he realized he was no longer alone. Something or someone was following his steps. The return of the cycle. An enigmatic conclusion. Carlos no longer knew what was real and what was a nightmare. The road, now, was no longer a physical place. It was an extension of emptiness itself, a dimension where time did not exist, where the living were nothing but shadows. He was trapped, and he knew there was no escape. The woman he had seen was no longer human, and he, just like her, was now lost in it all. "You will never leave, Carlos. You will never leave the road," the woman's voice whispered again. But now, he could no longer tell if it was her or something older and more sinister. He looked around, and to his surprise, there was no more road, only darkness. The creature that had appeared before him continued to watch him, motionless, but its presence was consuming everything around it. He no longer felt his body, no longer felt fear, but he knew he was being devoured by that being, by that eternal void. Then, a scream tore through the silence. A scream that didn't come from him, but from something farther away, something deeper. He didn't understand, but he felt the truth invade his mind all at once. The road was not a place. The road was a cycle, and he was the next soul it was consuming. Now he was no longer Carlos. He was part of the road, part of this eternal curse, and his fate was sealed. But who would come after him? Who would be the next victim of this endless road?